Picture Belgium, 1917. The ground never stops trembling. The sky above is not overcast. It is obliterated, swallowed by the rolling smoke of artillery that has not paused in, 3 weeks. The mud beneath you is cold, alive, and hungry, pulling at your boots with every step. The air smells of cordite, wet earth, and things that really should not be smelled. But the trench you are lying in was not dug in panic. It was built with centuries of precision behind every angle and every covered shelter. This is the story of the Māori Pioneer Battalion and the ancient engineering genius they carried from Aotearoa, New Zealand, to one of history's most lethal theatres of war. This is Fieldcraft Chronicles. To understand the Māori Pioneer Battalion's extraordinary effectiveness, you have to go back to the Maori fortified village. The Pa was not simply a defensive position. It was a masterwork of military architecture, evolved over generations through an intimate understanding of terrain, projectile physics, and human behavior under fire. By the early 19th century, as muskets flooded into New Zealand through trade, Maori military engineers faced a problem that would define the next century of warfare. How do you build a structure that neutralizes the destructive energy of firearms? Their answer was the earth itself, deep underground bunkers, angled traverses that broke the geometry of enfilade fire, and concealed fighting positions that absorbed blast rather than resisting it. The most famous example is Ruapekapeka Pa, the bat's nest, built by Kawiti in 1845. British forces who attacked it were confounded. Artillery bombardment, which would flatten a European fortification, barely touched it. European officers wrote home in bewilderment. They had encountered a military engineering tradition that had already solved problems they were still theorizing about. The knowledge they dismissed as primitive would prove indispensable on the Western Front 70 years later. When the battalion arrived in France and Belgium, they were assigned forward sapping, advancing new trench lines toward enemy positions while under direct fire. A sapper moves fast and low, reading the ground the way a navigator reads water, using every fold and dip in the terrain for concealment. Maori sappers rolled gabion barriers ahead of their digging parties to absorb bullets and shrapnel, working in a rhythm that other Allied soldiers openly marvelled at. In the shattered moonscape of the Ypres salient, where a moment's hesitation could mean death, that rhythm was everything. Once a trench was dug, the real work began. Timber-framed dugouts were sunk deep enough to absorb near-miss blast pressure. Excavated spoil was distributed so carefully across the surrounding ground that it left no visible scar from enemy observation posts in the air above. Every detail, the angle of a corner, the depth of a roof, the placement of a drainage channel in waterlogged Flemish soil, reflected knowledge built not in engineering schools, but through generations of building with the earth itself. Rations arrived cold and broken. Water was contaminated by shell-churned soil and chemical residue. Trench foot, flesh, rotting while still attached to the living body, stalked every man whose feet stayed wet for weeks on end, which in Flanders meant every man always. And yet the battalion held together in ways that purely mechanical military units did not. The haka was performed not only for ceremony, but for warmth, for collective defiance, for the reaffirmation of identity in a landscape designed to erase it. Songs carried across the dark. Shared rituals acknowledged the dead and steadied the living. Culture, it turned out, was its own form of fieldcraft, a technology for keeping the human being inside the soldier functional when everything external was failing. The most advanced survival knowledge is often the oldest. What the Māori Pioneer Battalion proved on the Western Front is that expertise forged through generations of genuine necessity is more resilient than any doctrine written in peacetime. European military engineers spent the opening years of the war learning in blood what Maori engineering tradition had encoded long before. The traverse, the underground shelter, the concealed spoil line, none of it was new in 1917. It was applied memory. For every modern bushcraft learner and student of preparedness, the lesson holds. The earth gives what you ask of it if you know how to ask. They knew, and now so do you. Fieldcraft Chronicles. If this episode gave you something to carry forward, share it. Put it in front of every history enthusiast, every survivalist, every person who believes that the knowledge of the past is the most practical preparation for the future. Subscribe to Fieldcraft Chronicles so you never miss an episode. Every week we go back into the field and into the archive, pulling forward the skills and stories that still have something to teach us. The knowledge is ancient. The lessons are eternal. We will keep digging them up.